I'm privileged to welcome you to Lunch and Learn for a Wednesday afternoon. Hope that everyone is doing well. If you're gathering with us on Facebook or YouTube or here on Zoom, we're studying the third section of the Hebrew Bible, the section called Ketuvim, and we have concluded the book of Job. And we were jumping on to the next book, but I thought before we did that, I realized that I ended kind of abruptly last time, and there were still lots of comments and questions. So before we jump forward, let's take a moment and breathe and go back and take a quick look at Job and talk about where we are in the Bible and what we've learned from this book and people's responses. So before we do that, Douglas has a comment about Meghan and Harry.
I just wanted to know what you were thinking about them.
You want to know the truth? Can I be very honest?
Yeah.
I think that they're a lovely young couple. I wish them mazel and hatzlacha rabbah. If they'd like to come to Valley Beth Shalom and learn Torah, we're open for them. If he'd like to make a small contribution out of the $50 or $100 million that he's inherited from his family, I'm delighted to accept his dollars as tzedakah to help the Jewish people move forward in the world. I'm sorry that she's experienced racism and rejection from her in-laws. Having worked with Jewish families for 50 years, I can say that it's not the first time I've heard a woman say my mother-in-law wasn't nice to me. I mean, Mazel tov, welcome, So yeah, I wish that everyone had the kind of financial wherewithal that they do to move across the continent, move into a beautiful mansion, and take care of this the way that they have. That's all. So that's what I can say honestly.
Well, one thing I think is that having money solves one problem, and that's the absence of money.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, and it's a damn good solution to that problem. I don't know if you know that, but it is what it is. That there's racism in the British royal family. I'm shocked. Shocked. That there's judgment. That there's it sounds to me like they're dealing with many of the same problems that most of us deal with, except most of us don't have $50 million in the bank to worry about. I feel bad for him. He lost his mom when he was very young. That must have been brutally traumatic for him. I feel very difficult. He was in a family business. Some of us have experience with family businesses. They have their pluses and minuses. This one happens to be a very, very, very public family business, but it's a family business. And if you don't like it, you leave and you go do something on your own. And I think that should be what they all do, frankly. I'm not a monarchist or an anti-monarchist. I just don't think it's very good to raise a kid in a family business where he doesn't have to work for himself and actually get out and do something. So I admire him. He was a helicopter pilot. He went to Afghanistan. He served his time in the British military. Great admiration for that. So that's it. I wish them well. If they want to come to VBS, the doors are open. We would even accept the children into the day school. Okay. Anything else?
Now back to Job.
Can I say something about that?
Yes, please, Louise. Go ahead.
So much of it focused on the fact that Diana also suffered a great many of the things that Meghan is.
Yes.
So in that case, you have to take it away from the color situation and deal with it from what Rabbi's perspective is, that they're coming into a family business, and that's difficult.
Yeah, it's brutal. And listen, what they did to Diana, I mean, if you can believe the Crown, which is the source authority, and believe the tabloids, they did terrible things to this woman. And, if Charles had been more of a man, he would have been more honest about this. Anyway, yeah, there's misogyny, there's racism, there's hatred. Yeah, there really is. And these poor people are suffering with it very, very publicly, which is very, very difficult. we don't have a monarchy here in America. We have movie stars that we like to tear apart. So
Yeah.
they're a lot more fun to tear. This is what you do. You create these public icons and then you beat them down. We can talk about that too. But let's move on to something more. Let's move on to something more practical, if we possibly can. All right. So we looked at the book of Job, and what I proposed to all of you was a particular reading of the book of Job, which I've taken from some of the reading that I did as I was studying. And basically, the problem with the book of Job is that it doesn't appear to be a book. That is, it doesn't have a central point of view. It doesn't have a central philosophy. It doesn't have a core ideology. What it is instead is a collage. It is a collage of multiple perspectives brought to bear on the most difficult of human problems. The problem of, is there a moral order in the universe? Is virtue, is good behavior rewarded? Is evil behavior punished? If someone is suffering, is there a justice behind that suffering? Or is suffering simply the random fate of being human beings in the natural world? That's the great question that all of us wonder about, when, especially in moments of tragedy, but we wonder this about all the time. And certainly in these days of COVID, as you read the newspaper every morning, and they have these very plaintive and difficult to read columns of these beautiful people, gentle people, creative people, kind people, loving people, who were taken down by this horrifying disease and had to die alone in an ICU unit someplace. And we all wonder, is there no justice in the world? I mean, that's the great question that Job is suffering with, is dealing with, is bearing. And there's no answer to it in the book. That is, the book doesn't say, well, here's the way that you answer the problem. What it does is something much more sophisticated, much more, in many ways, more modern. It says, well, there are multiple perspectives on this. Let's look at all of them. And what the book brings together is multiple narratives in different literary genre. Part of the book is a story. Part of the book is poetry. Part of the book is speeches. Part of the book is a story which sets out a certain moral perspective. Part of the book is a dialogue which argues a perspective, argues between two perspectives. Part of it is a set of soliloquies, of monologues, which bring perspectives. And as you close at the end of the book, there's no resolution. It doesn't say, well, and therefore, it doesn't say that. So what the book does at the very end is present all these different ways of understanding, of framing the question of why do we suffer, of framing the question of, is there a moral order, but doesn't, and offers us some of the ways that biblical people in the biblical era, as it were, in ancient Israel, address this problem, but doesn't leave us with any kind of sure and easy resolution of the problem. What it says instead at the end is, this is a problem. This is one of the things you have to deal with as you live in the world as a human being. And I think I've made this point before, and we'll have to make it again as we get into the next books of the Bible. Certainly the book of Ecclesiastes, the book of Kohelet, and also the book of Esther. And that is that the Bible itself is not a book of orthodoxy with a small o. That is, the Bible is not a book of firm, easy beliefs. The Bible doesn't offer us firm, easy beliefs. What the Bible does is capture the full repertoire of all of the responses of human beings to the dilemma of being alive. And so you're going to find books of the Bible, like the book of Exodus, which we're reading in the Torah these days, as we're in the Torah portion, and we're about to spend a great deal of time paying attention to as we prepare for Passover. The book of Exodus, which is a book of very sure and powerful faith. There we go. A book of Exodus, which is a book of sure, powerful faith. I mean, Exodus really does have this sense that the world is governed by a moral order. Just consider this image, right? The image of Moses and the people of Israel at the Red Sea. So they've escaped from slavery. Pharaoh's been smashed by the 10 plagues. This morning we had some hail here, so it was kind of a big deal. In school, the kids were going nuts. And I told them, don't worry, it's going to be followed by locust and darkness and the death of the firstborn. And that made them feel better. So the book of Exodus, we have this picture of a God who smashes the Pharaoh, takes his people out of Egypt, brings them to the shore of the Red Sea. Pharaoh comes chasing them. If you didn't read the book, you certainly have seen the movie. They're standing there. They fetch to Moses. Moses says, shut up, watch this, holds his arm over the sea. The sea splits. We march in between. Then they get to the other side. Moses holds his arm, and the sea comes back and it drowns Pharaoh. You all know that scene. Consider what that means symbolically. The second day of creation in Genesis, what God does is separate the waters. Water is the biblical symbol for chaos, right? If the very beginning, that's what the world is covered with. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The earth was unformed and void, tohu vavohu, and the Ruach Elohim and the Spirit of God hovered above the water. Water is an uncreated reality. It's uncreated cosmos. It's the mess of the world. God separates the waters and offers dry land as a place where life can exist. Separating the water is what God does at the beginning of creation to create what we call nature, a pattern of organized phenomenon that one can live in because you can pretty much predict what's going to happen. Nature can be predicted. It's day follows night, follows day, follows night. Spring, summer, winter, fall. Spring, summer, winter, fall. It gets cloudy, it's going to rain. It's sunny, it's going to be warm. You get a pretty good idea about how nature works. And that's how we can live in nature. And our generation, we know more about nature than any human beings ever did. We have microscopes that talk about microbes, and we understand how the Earth's crust moves, and we understand how weather works. You can predict nature because nature has an order to it, and it can be manipulated if you absolutely need to do that. You take a vaccine, you're not susceptible to the disease anymore. But what about morality? Is there a moral order? Are there rules of the world that are moral rules so that certain behaviors, certain human choices are followed by certain consequences? That works in nature. The law of gravity works in all places and all times. You drop something, it falls down. If it fell up, life would be very different, but it falls down. The question is there certain moral rules? And so what the book of Exodus tells us is, just as God split the water and created cosmos, nature, here God splits the water and creates moral order. What is moral order? From slavery to freedom, from bondage to the promised land. This is the moral order of human existence. That's the book of Exodus, the book of faith. But now we turn to a book like Job. And what Job tells us is, to quote the great rabbi, it ain't necessarily so. Because you can have a perfectly good man who suffers terribly. And it's not because he deserved it or did anything or brought it upon himself. It's the product of a God who is capricious. And that's Job's claim. Why are you doing this to me? He asks for those middle chapters. And at the end, he makes this beautiful speech about how I protected your moral order, God. Why didn't you protect me? And at the end, what does God say to him? God says, you don't understand anything about me. You don't understand anything about me. And that's the end of the book. It doesn't quite answer it, you see. So what we have here is an argument, is a contradiction. And we can see very plainly how the Bible is not attempting to give simply an orthodox answer, an orthodox with a small o answer. That is a traditional or classical answer. What the Bible is trying to do is to press us to look carefully at the difficulties, the contradictions, the dilemmas of being a human being, and to capture those dilemmas in literature. And that's what the book of Job is. Now, everybody wants an answer. I mean, I get asked this all the time. Why me, Rabbi? And I'm always tempted to give an answer. Boy, it's so much easier to give an answer. And I could be much richer and more powerful and more popular if I just gave answers. If I just said to people, well, you deserve it. But that's not true. I don't believe that, at least. It's not true. You deserve it. Right? Or if I said to them, well, if you prayed harder, if you gave more money to Valley Beth Shalom, things would be better for you. I mean, there are preachers who do this. Turn on early morning, Sunday morning television and see what goes on. you know. But that, you know, but the problem is that my tradition teaches me to press the question more than it does to accept a facile answer. And a facile answer to me is untrue. And it's something, and it can be dangerous. It can be terribly dangerous when you say to people, you've deserved your own suffering. Because you've then hurt somebody doubly. They're suffering and they're hurting. And now you tell them that it's their own damn fault, and they suffer even more. And that's a terrifying reality. All right, let's get some comments and questions. Yeah, Douglas, please.
I could have written God's speech as much more comforting and compelling.
Right.
Without just saying, shut up, you inconsequential piece of, of sand. And it could have been something like, I love you, boy chick. But you are part of me, but you are not of me. And, and my ways are the ways of the world. What I can be there, do is be there to comfort you as this happens. And that's a much different story than shut up, you. And I wouldn't be as dissatisfied with that answer.
So why do you suppose it ends the way it does?
Because they don't believe that.
Well,
the author didn't believe that.
Whoever wrote that piece of the book was looking into nature. What's characteristic of God's speech at the end is that this is a God of nature. And what you're being shown is that a God of nature, number one, takes no account of an individual. Right? Individuals don't count in nature, only species, and even species don't count very much, right? And number two, that the phenomenon of nature have no morality behind them. It rains on the fields of the poor and the rich. It rains on the fields of the righteous and the wicked. It doesn't, there's no morality in nature. If you want morality in nature, you got to put it there. Right? But that's a different answer to the question. The God of nature doesn't pay attention to you, nor does the God of nature invoke justice. And besides, the God of nature works in ways that you'll never understand, says the end. And there's a sort of wildness to the world. And the real point of the end, I think what he's really trying to say at the end is that there's an element of the tragic. There's an element of the tragic, of the unexplained misery of the world that you can't eliminate. You can't sweep that away. That's in there. Now, you can do something about it. You can ameliorate that if that's your response, which is really, to me, what the response of the rabbinic tradition was. The rabbinic tradition read this and said, it's my job to make gentle the world that is so brutal. And that's mitzvah. That's what I do in the world. That's my job in the world, right? But you have here a recognition that the tragic is part of the repertoire of human experiences and has to be accounted for. You're right. If you're unsatisfied, maybe that was the intention of the author, so that you would walk away going, no, I'm a better God than that God, or that's not my God, or that picture of God is incomplete. Those are all very legitimate interpretive answers to the end of the book. And I appreciate that. Andy, you come next.
I looked at this and all I kept thinking of was, oops, all right, got all these icons popping up. I apologize.
That's all right. It's cool. We'll take clapping hands anytime.
So I looked at it as, if we were to interpret the book and almost like, you were talking about how this is the morality and this is how, we follow these things, and this shows you, hey, this is what happens when sometimes things don't work out right. I'm going to use the Bible against itself and say, think of the Tower of Babel, and when all these different languages were coming in, and how I view it as, this is not, here's the manual. Okay, turn to page 6. If this happens, here's what happens. It's different for every person. And we have to figure out, maybe the path that I was doing, that I was following, maybe I was doing the wrong thing. I need to look at myself, and then maybe I have to make adjustments, and maybe I have to change the way I'm doing things. Maybe what works for another person doesn't work for me, and then I have to find my home. And it's just a different way of using that book and saying, oh, maybe that's what the message was.
I really appreciate that. When I had cancer many years ago. And when I had cancer, One of the things that happens when you have cancer is people can't figure out what to say to you. So they say the dumbest things, right? So people would come to me and say, this is really rough, isn't it? I said, yeah, I'm pretty scared. It's pretty hard on me. I said, well, it's going to make you a much better rabbi. Okay, thank you very much. If somebody comes to you and says, the reason you're suffering is, or the advantage of this to you is, it's obnoxious. But if you say that, if I say, I have to acknowledge that it's true in the end, right? Actually, that cancer made me a better rabbi. I think it made me a better person in many ways. But that's for me to figure out, not for somebody to tell me, right? That's for me to figure out. So it's not that there was any justice in it. I don't think I deserved cancer. I don't think I earned it. I don't think I got it because I was evil. Yeah, it's true. I ate a lot of chazarai when I was a kid, but that wasn't the reason I got it. Right. But I think that so the meaning of it doesn't come from where it came from. The meaning of it derives from what I learned from it. It did change me. It did make me different. It did open me to certain experiences, but that's for me to decide, not for anybody to ever tell me. So I think that your approach is a very wise approach. If you're suffering and you look at yourself and you say, can I learn something from this? I don't want this. I didn't ask for this. I didn't deserve this. I didn't earn this. I didn't bring this on myself. But now that it's here, is there some meaning that I can derive from it, that I can learn from it? That's a very, very, very productive approach. That's a very productive approach to that problem. Because that way you can say, all right, it wasn't a complete waste. It wasn't just, it may have been random in how it came to me, but it wasn't random in what it did to me in the end. That's a very nice thing. That I appreciate that very much. All right, Stan, and then Bert, and then David. Go ahead.
When you finished talking about the book of Job, did you ask the question as an individual how it is when we come to suffering or when we come to hard decisions to make, what we have to, to have the confidence or whatever to go forward, as opposed, since we can't say, well, there's no reason for this and I can't depend on God because we don't know about God. Did you ask that question as an individual, or am I thinking of something else?
Did I ask the question of what?
As an individual, what do we do since we can't depend upon God based on the book of Job? What is it that makes us capable of dealing with these situations?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question. What are the sources of resilience?
Because
where
I
do
have
you...
an answer for myself.
Okay,
and I
go ahead.
believe that it's everybody for themselves. As we said, for me, I look at what I've been able to deal with situations in the past, and because I've been able to deal with difficulties in the past or whatever, I have the confidence to go forward and say I can deal with it now.
All right, that's a beautiful way to understand it. But see, then what you're saying is, look, I'm not going to go look for meaning in the event. I'm just going to go look for sources of resilience. If you ever notice, by the way, the most famous book written on this topic is that book by Harold Kushner, but everybody gets the title wrong. It's not why bad things happen to good people. It's when bad things happen to good people. And he meant that very specifically. He said, look, I can't answer why bad things happen to good people. But the question is, what do we do then? And what attitudes do we have to have in order to bring resilience to ourselves and not bring a deep, empty sense of suffering, not to make our suffering worse? So it's a when, it's what do I do next? And that's a very nice way to think about it. Bert's next, right? And then David, and then Sandy. Okay.
When we spend these times together, I'm beginning to feel like I'm working on a giant jigsaw puzzle, and you keep dropping off pieces. And I need I need to figure out where it goes in the puzzle and if it goes in the puzzle. And a couple of the pieces that came today to me is your notion of perspective. How do you look at things? Or in what context do you look at things? If there is no moral code, or if we don't know really what it is, what do we do? Well, months ago, years ago, you gave us a piece of guidance. There's this thing called the 10 Commandments. It's a clue. Do good stuff. Don't do bad stuff. Okay. Now, if I live my life, or if I form some opinions with that as a core, I may not even have to deal with the subject, with the feelings of, what do I think about God? He gave me a signpost. It's that away, and it's not that away. If I live by that signpost, I can have a comfortable code of my own moral conduct. Now, hopefully it's what he or what she or what they want me to do. And I don't have to deal with how come there was a Holocaust? People died in COVID, as you pointed out. They were alone. People died in the concentration camps, and they were alone, etc. You go back over the centuries. Nothing I can do about that. But again, to take one of the little pieces you dropped today, what can I do about it? And it isn't, should I do something about it? Because I've already convinced myself I should. I can, again, I use the phrase with you, jump on the Schulweiss bandwagon. I can do tikkun olam, you know, I can volunteer, lots of stuff like that. So again, my metaphor this week is, it's a jigsaw puzzle. I have a baseline, the signpost that somehow got there. And if I use that, I don't have to fuss with the other stuff.
Okay.
For me, Job was very insightful, very meaningful, very mentally disturbing, but it really made me start to think about some of these things.
Okay, I'm glad you're thinking about it. That's really good. I'm going to give a talk tonight, actually, as part of this series that I'm doing about what does it mean to believe in God. So let me give you just a preview of coming attractions, just a very short, interesting idea. Instead of thinking of this as a jigsaw puzzle, remember those puzzles we used to do as kids that where you connect the dots, right? So you have a page, you have all these dots on it, right? Some of them, they cheated, they gave you numbers, right? So you went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. But some of them, as you got older, they were more sophisticated. You had to figure out how to connect the dots to make the picture. There weren't numbers. You had to figure out how they connected. Think of life as a connect the dots. And the question is, what pattern do you have to find in your own existence and in your life in the world in order to make sense of the life that you live, in order to make sense of the convictions that you hold, in order to make sense of the values that you hold, right? So one of the ways, for example, can we ameliorate suffering? Is suffering the product of a divine decree, or is suffering the product of bad choices, or is suffering just the randomness of the universe? See, the question, how you answer those questions determines what you do. If I believe that the world could not be fixed, if I believe that suffering was inevitable, if I believe that the world was unredeemable, I would lock myself behind, high gates, and I would have a life of pleasure and hedonism and not worry about anything. It's only because you and I, Bert, have this crazy idea that we can actually make the world a little better, that we give charity, we devote ourselves to others, we transcend the impulses of life, right? Sometimes I get tired and I watch TV at the end of the day, and I watch all these commercials or these television programs about people whose whole lives are devoted to food and sex and entertainment and diversion. And I say to myself, could I live that life? I might envy that for a few minutes, but the truth is I can't, because my puzzle adds up to a different life than that person's puzzle. And that really is what this is about. How do you organize your universe to make sense of the life that you want to live? I'm going to talk about this tonight at some length. So if you want to, it's a commercial, I don't know, shameless plug, but if you want to come back. David, you're next, and then Sandy.
Continuing on from that, something jumped out at me as everybody was talking and you were talking, is that it's very easy to judge a homeless person. For instance, it's very easy to see somebody who's homeless and say, oh, they must have done something, very foolish, and it's, like it's their fault. And so one of the things that I just thought of while I was listening to was, oh, wait a minute. if it's not Job's fault, then maybe when I see, not just when you talk about cancer and you don't blame yourself, well, but it's very easy to be prejudiced against other people for where they are and how they are, instead of recognizing that life happens along the way. The other thing I just thought of is I've been listening to, I was listening to Rabbi Schulweiss's talk from his commemoration and the one that we're all one, Echad. And so that sort of, if you marry that to what the writer, and that's another thing, that these are writers, you know, I keep thinking that that's God talking. No, this is a writer who may be, you may say, divinely led, but it's still a writer who's writing for whatever reason is writing this. And but I'm reconciling God saying, you can't understand me, I'm beyond your comprehension, and at the same time, Echad, what Rabbi Schulweiss would say, that we're all one. It's a very, it's a challenge to reconcile those two, or maybe, you know, it's but yes and, you know, kind of thing. That's all.
No, I think you could push this a little bit farther. Okay, the writer of Job is a perspective. It's one guy's perspective. It's one perspective in the Bible. But you get a different. Let's take Genesis 18, where Abraham steps forward and God says, "I'm gonna wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah," and Abraham says, "You can't do that. It's not justice. And you're the judge of all the earth. You have to do justice." And God says, "You're right." Now think about that for a minute. In that story, a man does challenge God on the basis of judgment, on justice, because there's a common moral language between the two. And in that common moral language between the two, God agrees that he can't wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah unless there's no good people left in. I mean, there's a common moral language. The author of Genesis 18 is pushing back against Job. And I happen to think it's very explicit, because it's the only 2 chapters in the Bible where a human being describes himself as being but dust and ashes. In Job, it's a description. He says, "I'm nobody. I can't question you. You're right." And it's his resignation. It's his moral resignation. In Genesis 18, it's meant ironically. It's when Abraham says, "Listen, I'm just dust and ashes, but if I find 10 guys in the city, you got to let them go." Right? It's an ironic statement. And the texts parallel each other very closely in that sense. So I think that you have it right. I think that you have it right. I think that you have to look for the configuration of the dots that make it possible to be the person you most want to be in the world. That's what the challenge is here. Okay? Sandy, you're going to be next. Thank you for waiting. There you go.
Okay, hi. No, I think one of the saddest things in the story is that his friends basically are against him. They don't recognize him. They don't support him. So and in the sense, when you say one person's perspective, I think it's life's perspective, that if you don't have the resilience to go forth and go on, there's not necessarily anybody there to catch you, to help you. I mean, and the saddest thing is that his friends there was nobody there to help him. And sometimes that's true. And the truth is that if it's a God that's all over, there is so much injustice all over that we can't look for that. We have to look within within ourselves to find it, because it certainly isn't there in Uganda. It certainly isn't there in South Africa or wherever. There are so many places that there's no justice right now.
I think it's a wonderful observation. If you remember what happens at the end of chapter 2, when Job is suffering, it says his 3 friends came and they sat with him in silence. And that really is what you do. I mean, there's a law, there's a tradition, a mitzvah, that when you go to a house of Shiva, you don't try to explain anything. You shut up. I mean, people always say to me, like, I'm going to a house of Shiva. What do I say? I say, you go and you hold the hand of the person who's grieving and you say, I'm very sorry for your loss. And then be quiet. You don't have to say anything else, right? If you happen to know the person, you can say, I really enjoyed being with your loved one. Your loved one is important to me. We spent a lot of, you could say those things, but you don't go and try to say, here's why you're suffering,
Exactly.
which is what the friends come and do after that. Once they try to start explaining to him and responding to his resignation, to his anguish with explanations, you realize that they see themselves, the phrase we use is God's lawyers, right? They're God's defense attorneys. Job is hurling an accusation at God. I am suffering and you are unjust because I don't deserve this suffering. And the friends come in to defend God, right? To play God's defense attorney. And what they end up doing is, in order to defend God, they have to castigate Job. You know, why were your kids killed? Because they were sinful. You know, why are you suffering? Because you're a sinner. Which you can see plainly what they're doing. You end up doubling the person's pain. Because not only do you have to suffer, but now someone's telling you it's your own damn fault. Right? Remember when you were a little kid and you hurt yourself and your mother said, see, you're being punished, you know? Like, that makes it worse. That it's random.
Exactly.
I can live with evil that's random. It hurts me, but I can live with it. But if you tell me it's my own damn fault, I mean, that's awful. And then what's worse, of course, in Job's is the worst case scenario. Well, is he doesn't know what sin he's done, so he doesn't know what he's being taught. If punishment is to rehabilitate you, is to change you, you don't know what you're being taught because you don't know what sin you did, and then you don't know how to expiate it. You see, so it really is a trap. And the friends jump right into that. They jump right into that and they heap it on him. And the great thing is that he just pushes it back on them and says, really? Remember what he says? He says, if you really believe God is just, good, let's set up a court and find out.
Right.
We have a way of figuring out whether something is just or not. It's called court. Let's have it. Let's have it out. Bring God to court. And he said, God won't come to court. And even if God did come to court, God's God. God can make anybody say anything, right? I mean, hell, if Rodney, if O.J. Simpson can get away with it. Yeah, but that's the point. I mean, how can you do? I mean, so that's what that middle section is about. That's what the middle section is about. And each time the friends keep pushing harder against him, you cringe. You cringe. And I've been to Shiva minions where people, what, please. I mean, first of all, they get nervous. They want to distract the mourner. How about them Dodgers? You think they have a chance? This person's like grieving for their mother, their father, their friend, their spouse. I don't talk about the Dodgers, or they come up with these bizarro, explanations. Well, you're going to be better. So you're exactly right. And then, to Stan's point, one of the other places that we get resilience when it's good is from friends and community who know how to comfort us, right? The friends who came to me when I was sick and held me up, gave me strength, and reminded me that there was something to fight for. Those who come to Shiva minions and hold us and tell us that they love us and they love the ones that we're mourning, and they're with us and they're not going to let us go. I mean, these are very, very valuable gifts. The gifts of community and friendship. So that's what part of that middle part of the book is really about. Anyone else before we conclude? Yes, Arthur, please, welcome. You have to unmute, sir. It's that little area. Yeah, look for the little icon on the left. There's a little microphone on it. There you go. You're up.
Okay. First of all, I think that all of the discussions that have been offered, including yours, are, hit the nail on the head, and I really can't add much. But I look at this in a historical perspective. And I think that what was, I almost associate, Job with the story of Gilgamesh, because ultimately the story of Gilgamesh, which may be, closely at the same, epical period, it just says, we're finite. Our lives are, limited, and we cannot live forever. And that was a very, very profound statement.
Mhm.
Now, with Job, I tend to think it says it all. I happen to have a background from science, and I tend to sort of escape into it very often. But basically, what I think we need is a paradigm, a type of adjustment or shift that with religion basically saying, well, we have an absolute, and our absolute is our belief in God, et cetera, at least in the, Orthodox version. And with conservative and reform, I think we sort of softened it a bit. And but basically, I think that each person has to establish his own set of categorical imperatives, and basically they again are bound with their relationship to other people, and those relationships, if they're not productive and they're not going to help, and you're not going to be helped, you're not going to be helping someone else, you're not going to make things better for them, then move on to other people, move on to other situations.
It's a good ethic. I like that ethic. Thank you.
And basically, with regard to health and be it cancer, be it heart disease, at our age, we've all probably, one in every three of us have dealt with some form of cancer or another. And I think the most important thing that was said by Winston Churchill, and that was never, 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 never give up. And, these are things that, we all have to internalize and live by, and find our, meaning and justification for what we believe in through others, because otherwise we're just talking, whistling in the wind. And again, I think that you have offered us a very, very worthwhile discussion.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. That's great. Great to have you along. So here's what I want to do. I want to, the next logical book to study is Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, except that it's even more depressing than Job. If it could be possible that there's a book that's even more depressing than Job, it's Ecclesiastes. So I thought we would take a break for a moment. If you turn in the Bible, the next section of the Hebrew Bible, once you get past Psalms, Proverbs, and Job, is a section called the 5 Megillot, the 5 short books. They're short scrolls that are read on holidays. Ecclesiastes is one of them, right? Song of Songs is one of them. Song of Songs is a sensual love poem. We could do that, but we should really do it at night with some wine and candles, okay? So we'll have to think about that, okay? Echa, which is a book about lamentation, which, as you, from the title, you can see that it's not exactly a joyful book. So I thought we'd do something a little more fun, but as I'm starting to prepare this, I got to tell you that right away, we jump right back into many of the same issues, except it's dealt with in a different way. So what I want to do is, I know it's Pesach, but we're going to go backwards into Purim, and we're going to go back to Esther, okay? And this will be our next text to look at. So here is the beginning of the book of Esther, and I just want to set it for you today, because I'm going to ask you a question to think about until next week, okay? It happened in the days of Achashverosh. Achashverosh, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Nubia. So India to Sudan. So the whole southern hemisphere is his. Basically the Silk Road. Achashverosh is the Persian translation, or the Persian name, of a king who's known as Artaxerxes, who was the great Persian emperor. And Artaxerxes, he reigns over the whole world, okay? In those days, when King Ahasuerus occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan, the name of the town was Susa, actually. Shushan is the Hebrew-sized version. But the fun part of that is that if you take the Hebrew word Shushan and you write it out in Hebrew letters, it's Shin Shin, or Sin Sin Vav Nun, which spells Sason, which means happiness, the kingdom of happiness, the happiest place on earth. This is like, this wonderful place. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers, the administration of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the provinces of his service. For no fewer than 180 days, he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom, the splendid glory of his majesty. So he has a World's Fair in which he displays all the stuff that he's stolen from all of the countries that he now rules. If you've ever been to the British Museum, that's what it is. I mean, the British Museum is an exquisite place, except when you realize that all of this stuff was basically ripped off from Egypt and Iraq, and they have the Elgin marbles there. What are the Elgin marbles? The decorations from the Acropolis, right? From the Parthenon. They liked them, so we took them. You know, we came, we saw, we ripped them off. That's what we did. And this is what Achashverosh is doing, because this is what kings do, right? And after 180 days, at the end of this period, after 6 months, he gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress Shushan, high and low alike. So this is very common. A king or a nobleman would give a banquet, a feast for everybody who lived in town. Everybody lived in town. And the Bible now tells us not just that he gave a banquet, but what were the decorations? Now, having gone to a number of bar mitzvahs at Valley Beth Shalom, this is not unfamiliar to me, right? There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool, caught up with cords of fine linen and pure wool, except that you're sitting here going, what? This is the Bible. This is supposed to be about the moral order of the universe. This is supposed to be about our relationship with God and the world. This is supposed to be about what's expected of me as a righteous person living in an unrighteous world. And what am I talking about? The interior decorating of Achashverosh's wine feast, right? Cords of fine linen and purple wool, silver rods and alabaster columns. There were couches of gold and silver. It really does sound like a bar mitzvah, right? On pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. Royal wine was served in abundance, as befits a king, in golden beakers, not just royal wine, mind you, but in golden beakers, you know, beakers of varied designs. And the rule for drinking was no restrictions. For the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes. And Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women. So what do we have here at the beginning of the book? Well, I was hoping to bring you a book that would bring a little comic relief to this conversation, having spent so much time dealing with Job and the heaviness of suffering in the world. And right away, we have a book which you are going to see is remarkable in two facets. On the one hand, it is truly ridiculous. It is ribald comedy. All of the important moments happen at drunken parties. It sounds like my college days. I mean, it's really that kind of an experience. And yet, it's trying to deal with a reality in the world. In fact, what I'm going to argue at the end of the book of Esther is that what the book of Esther is about is taking the most difficult truth and wrapping it in the most ridiculous context. And that's what the book of Esther is, because instead of beginning like the Bible begins, how does the Bible begin? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and the earth was unformed and void, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. In the beginning, there's God creating, and God is moving from chaos to cosmos, from disorder to order. The universe we're living in this book is not ruled by the God of creation. It's ruled by Achashverosh. And what do you see from Achashverosh from the very first words of the book? He doesn't move from chaos to order. He moves the other way around. He starts with order and he makes chaos. He is the king of chaos. And the question is going to be, how do you live in a world that's not ruled by a God who enforces a moral order, but how do you live in a world that's ruled by the king of chaos? What are the moral rules in an amoral, chaotic, drunken world? And I think that's a good question to end this lesson with and to think about for a week until we come back next week. Okay? Let me wish all of you a very, very good week. Take good care. A couple of quick announcements. Of course, tonight I'm doing the second episode of Questions That Won't Go Away, 7 o'clock right here on Facebook, Zoom, or YouTube. Come and join us. You'll find the link on the VBS website. Click on VBS at home. go down to the announcement of the course, and I'd love to have you tonight at 7. Every morning, davening at 7:30 in the morning, every evening at 5, until this weekend when we change back. We change the clocks. We change the clocks on Saturday night at 2 o'clock in the morning. So be sure that Sunday night, we're going to be davening at 6, not at 5. And that's what it's going to be for the duration for the next 6 months, of course. School is back in session at Valley Beth Shalom. Our nursery school's in session. The day school, K to 6, back in session. The kids are there. It's wonderful. And the Hebrew school, the ECLC, the Eitz Chaim Learning Center, is going back on Sunday. Our first in-person service will be a week from Friday night. We're having Rimonim service at the shul. If you'd like to come, go to the VBS website and sign up. You have to register so we know who you are and we make sure that you're healthy. But we'd love to have you there. Please go to the website and take a look. If you did not pick up your Mishloach Manot, there's still about 500 of them at the shul. They're wonderful packages of things that will bring you comfort and joy. So go to the synagogue and pick one up. Every VBS family, every VBS member has one. You don't have to pay for it. It's free. It's a gift from all of us, and it's a lot of fun. So go to the shul and pick one up. Okay? Everybody take care. Stay well.
Thank you for the
Go
beautiful
get the vaccine.
Schlockmanis.
Bring your
Go-
card. You can bring
go-
your card. Show you're
go-
vaccinated.
Go